everyone. Welcome again to another session of Ashram Talks. Today we're going to be continuing to explore Chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, verses 4 and 5. We have a very interesting topic. Our class today is called Live Your Purpose, Not Someone Else's Life. I'm joined again by author and PhD candidate Simon Haas. Welcome, Simon. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sienna. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, us as well. So without further ado, we can get started for today.
So today, we'll be looking at how to be true to our purpose and not follow someone else's life. So many of us are stuck in jobs that are not aligned with who we are, and therefore they don't really satisfy us. They steal away our vitality. So we'll look at how to recognize our own unique nature and gifts. You can even say powers. I'm in Costa Rica at the moment, and in our garden, we have lots of hummingbirds, and they sometimes fly into the house, and many of them are emerald. So they fly around and suddenly they stand still in the middle of the air and hover without moving position, like an emerald suspended in midair. So every life form has a particular gift or a power. A bee is able to manufacture honey. A fish draws oxygen out of water. Glowworms, they illuminate the darkness like stars fallen to the earth. And we too each have a unique gift and contribution to make. We're not all built in the same way. We have a unique nature which allows us to express ourselves in the world and make our contribution. So we'll be exploring that today. Rather than pretend we're someone else or try to live up to be what others expect us to be. The first rule of Krishna's teachings on the yoga of action, karma yoga, is to be true to our nature. As Krishna observes, one's own path, even if imperfect, is better than another's path followed perfectly. By carrying out action in accord with our own nature, one doesn't go wrong. So before we begin, in the tradition of ancient India, let's begin with a Mangala Charanam, an auspicious invocation. We've spoken a little bit in previous episodes what a Mangala Charanam is. It's really a way to transition from the profane, the realm of the ordinary, into the realm of the sacred, and allows us to enter into the wisdom teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, not just from the dimension of information, but to enter into these teachings deeply, so we come away with gifts that change the way that we approach our life. He Shri Guru Jnana Dina Bandho Swananda Data Karunaika Sindho Vrindavanasi Nahitavatara Prasidha Radha Pranaya Prachara. So today we're looking at verses 4 and 5 of chapter 2. So just a quick reminder or a summary for those of you who are joining and haven't been following the verses that came, the passages that came previous to this. The warrior Arjuna is on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and he asks his dear friend and charioteer Krishna to take the chariot between the two armies that are facing each other. And there, on both sides of the battlefield, he sees his teachers, his grandparents, uncles, nephews, sons, friends, and so on. And he realizes what is about to unfold, and this triggers a dark night of the soul. So an experience of deep existential crisis. In past episodes, we looked at the 4 shared signs of a dark night of the soul. And Sanjaya, who's narrating this to the blind king Dhritarashtra, explains what Arjuna is going through. And there are four different key features of his experience of crisis. And one of those is intense suffering, especially in relation to time. So fear, lamentation, and confusion. An impulse to leave, to disengage from life, which for Arjuna takes the form of a strong desire to leave the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And this experience of crisis also brings out aspects of Arjuna that or aspects of any of us, if we're experiencing this kind of crisis, there are parts of us that we're not aware of, and we may not even wish to acknowledge. And those come to the surface and become visible, maybe for the first time. And then the fourth symptom or sign of a dark night of the soul is complete helplessness. So Arjuna he has the desire, he has the will to pull himself out of this, but not the power. And he's expressing his dilemma to Krishna in the verses of the end of chapter 1 and now the beginning of chapter 2. So let's turn to verse 4, which is where we're at this point. Arjuna uvacha katam bhishmam aham sankye dronam cha madhusudana ishubhi pratiyotsyami pujarhav arisudana. So Arjuna uvacha, Arjuna says. What did he say? Katam means how. Aham is I. And pratiyotsyami means shall I fight against. It's in the future. So he's saying, how shall I fight against Bhishma, Drona? Ishu means arrow, and Shubhi is instrumental, plural of arrow. So using arrows, how will I fight Bhishma and Drona, who are puja arho, worthy of my worship? So that's what he's asking. He's asking Krishna. So the tone of the verse conveys Arjuna's moral and emotional dilemma. He's troubled by the idea of fighting his revered elders. And interestingly, he addresses Krishna here twice. So Arisudana and also Madhusudana. Arisudana means slayer of enemies. So he's addressing Krishna twice, and the commentator, the Gaudiya Vaishnava commentator, Baladev Vidyabhushana, he explains that there's a fault of repetition in that verse. And what's the reason for that? Arjuna is afflicted with grief. So he's unaware of what he has said and what he's about to say. He's unaware of the connection between previous and later statements. So, in other words, Arjuna is speaking here and he's filled with grief and with emotion. And what he's expressing is not always entirely coherent. So we move now to the next verse, verse 5. And remember here that Arjuna describes his crisis, his dark night of the soul is so intense that it even has physical symptoms. So he's trembling as he's standing there. He finds himself no longer able to stand. His bow slips from his hand. The hairs on his body are standing on end, and his mind is reeling. So then he says, Gurun hatva hi mahanubhavan shreyo bhoktum bhaikshyam api haloke hatvartakamams tu gurum ihaiva bunji abhoghan rudira pradigdhan. So here he says, it is better to live in this world by begging than to live at the cost of the lives of great souls who are my teachers, even though they are avaricious. So the Sanskrit is artakamam, which means driven by desire for wealth and pleasure. So they are nonetheless superiors, in other words, teachers and elders. If they are killed or spoils, bhogan, so whatever enjoyment we may get at the end of all this will be, and here this is a very strong wording, will be rudhira pradigdhan, tainted with blood. Pradigdha, smeared with, and rudhira means blood. So at this point, Arjuna wants to leave the battlefield. There are many, in this part of the Gita, there are many Arjuna's names, different names or epithets we find them in the verses. So one of them is holder of the bow. So the holder of the bow has deliberately cast aside his bow and arrows. So as a warrior, this represents his instrument of action, and he wants to leave Kurukshetra, the field of action. In previous episode, we looked at the different dimensions of the Bhagavad Gita as a text. So there are different dimensions simultaneously. There's historical, ethical dimension, devotional dimension, symbolic dimension, and these often overlap, of course. The great commentator on the Gita, Sri Madhvacharya, for instance, he explains some of the symbolic significance of the Gita, which makes the text immediately relevant to us, rather than being like a relic from a previous age. It's directly relevant to navigating life skillfully. And so we looked at Kurukshetra. Kuru comes from Kri, which means action, which means to do. It comes from the verbal root Kri, to do, and Kshetra means field. So Kurukshetra symbolizes the field of action, the field of now. Now is the only place that action happens. Any action we take in the future, it'll be in the present moment when we take it. So Kurukshetra, Arjuna's at Kurukshetra. In that sense, we are also at Kurukshetra. Arjuna wants to leave Kurukshetra, the field of action. And he's expressing that here in these verses. And that's, of course, one of the signs or symptoms of a dark night of the soul, of what's known as vishada, or despair, existential crisis, is to disengage from life, the desire or impulse to disengage from life. So faced with the dark night of the soul, Arjuna wants to avoid action. He's a warrior, but here he casts aside his bow, his instrument of action, and he wants to leave. Krishna will reply to Arjuna, you cannot escape action, not even for a moment. In other words, as mentioned in a previous episode, even when we choose not to act, that is still an action with consequences, for better or for worse. So given that we can never escape action, the real question becomes, how can we act skillfully? And that's what Krishna defines as yoga. In this chapter, chapter 2, yoga karmasu kaushalam. Yoga is skillfulness in action. Now you see here, for those of you who are perhaps interested in yoga, you see here a very different definition to Patanjali's definition of yoga in the Yoga Sutras. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the movements of the mind. In other words, it's disengagement from the world and stilling the movements of the mind altogether. Here, Krishna defines yoga in terms of action. It's not about disengaging from the world, but it's about engaging with the world, but skillfully. So, what does it mean? What does skillfulness in actions mean? You could say, what does yoga mean? One very important part is being true to our nature, not abandoning ourselves. So we're each born with a particular nature, which allows us to make a unique contribution in the world. And whilst we can spend so much time in our life fighting ourselves, Krishna counsels Arjuna to be true to his nature. He says, beings must follow their nature. What can repression accomplish? So Arjuna's a warrior by nature, and in his dark night of the soul, he wants to give up being a warrior. It's a difficult path. He would rather take up life as a wandering monk And that's what he expresses in this verse. Shreyo bhoktum bhaikshyam apiha loke. Better to live by begging. So, in other words, better to leave this field, Kurukshetra, and just become a wandering monk, a beggar, and live in that way. So it's a complete shift in lifestyle. And Krishna is about to teach him the importance of being true to our nature. So why is that so important, being true to our nature? Because in our society, in our culture, there are so many pressures on us not to be true to who we are. There are different ideas of what it means to be successful, and a lot of pressure from perhaps even from our own family, our parents, from friends, from colleagues, from the media, advertising industry, to be a certain way, a certain idea of what it means to be successful. And we will tend easily to look for, to pursue a career or to look for work that aligns with these ideas of success, without always, without necessarily considering carefully who we are as a person, what our personality, what our nature is, how we're built. So there is a palliative nurse, and her name is Bronnie Ware, and some of you may have heard of her. So she's a palliative nurse, meaning that she looks after patients who are in their final days. And she thought to herself, I will not only care for these patients in the best way that I can, but maybe I can also learn from them. Because awareness of our mortality has a way of giving us a particular perspective that's often lost in the hectic, kind of frenetic movement of everyday life. So she began asking her patients, what in your life went well? If you could start all over, is there anything you would have done differently? She also asked, what's your biggest regret? And there was one regret that kept on coming up again and again and again. What is the number one regret of dying patients? I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself and not live to the expectations of everyone else around me. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself. That's the number one regret of dying patients. This is the same teaching that Krishna gave to Arjuna thousands of years earlier. Krishna says it's better to follow one's path, even if imperfectly, meaning even if one makes mistakes, than to follow another's path perfectly. So we can follow someone else's path and accumulate all the trappings, all the symbols of status and success. However we want to measure that. The large house, the big car, the picket fence, however we want to measure that. If we're not following our own nature, we won't find fulfillment in what we do. So Krishna says, by carrying out action in accord with our own nature, one doesn't go wrong. That's a powerful statement. And we will come to Krishna's teachings on karma yoga, the yoga of work or the yoga of action, a little later, towards the end of this chapter 2. But it begins here with Arjuna, who is faced with whose calling is as a warrior, but he wants to abandon that and take up a different life, the life of a wandering monk. So to express our nature, our calling, and making it a personal offering of the heart is that really our birthright. It's what we're placed on earth to do. But how do we know what our nature is? That's the question. We've spent so many years, perhaps even decades, trying to live up to the expectations of others and trying to fit in, that we may not know anymore what our nature is. So sometimes in workshops on the Bhagavad Gita, what I do at the beginning of a workshop is I have different gemstones. So I have, you're not able to see here, but I have a pile of gemstones. Here you have rose quartz, various different amethysts and opals and agates. And I ask people who come in for this workshop to select a particular semi-precious jewel that really speaks to them, that they're drawn to instinctively, and to hold it in the palm of their hand, but not to look at it. So each individual will like pick a particular gemstone and they'll hold on to it. And I'll continue with the workshop. And, maybe 15 minutes will pass or 20 minutes will pass. And then I'll ask various people in the audience, don't look at the gemstone you have in your hand, but tell me what it is. And they can feel they're holding on to something. It's warm in the palm of their hand. But by this stage, after maybe 20 minutes, usually about half in the audience, they don't remember exactly which gemstone they picked. Did they pick the amethyst or the agate? Is it blue or is it green? They can't remember, but they're not allowed to look at it at this stage. So we've been given so many gifts: health, perhaps education, finances, intelligence, creativity, beauty, various gifts. We each have certain gemstones that have been given to us in this life. But maybe the most valuable gemstone that we have is our unique personality, our nature, that allows us to express ourselves in a way that is different to everyone else, in a way that's truly unique. So if we spend years, imagine, holding on to a gemstone, and that symbolizes our nature, and not looking at that, just kind of having it there, it's sitting there, but not paying attention to it. For 15, 20 minutes, we might forget what it is that we're holding in the palm of our hand. Imagine doing the same for our nature, but not ignoring it for 15 minutes, but for 15 years or 20 or 30 years. It may be difficult to understand what our nature is, and it may take a little bit of exploration to connect with it, reconnect with it. So one thing we can do is begin by looking to our gifts. So if we're naturally good at something, it may offer us a clue about our nature. Every life form has a particular gift, a power, so to speak. But recognizing our gifts is a starting point, but it's actually through active engagement with the world that our calling, our purpose is revealed to us. It's by being of service in life that we're summoned to express our nature in a specific way. And then our nature manifests most clearly to us as a calling. But there is also one way, there's one sign whether or not we are connecting with our nature. And it's a very simple one. We can ask ourselves, do I feel more alive? Is what I'm doing creating vitality, or is it sapping my strength and making me feel dead? That's a sure sign. And I think we all have some experience of that. So I think, we've all had that experience where we're doing something that we truly love. We may even, we'll spend all our time doing it. We may even, forget to eat and to sleep, but rather than feeling less energy, we'll feel more vitality and more energy. So that's what happens when we align with who we are, in terms of the nature that we've been given in this particular life. So that, connecting with that nature that we have is not only it's the first step of karma yoga, the yoga of action. And we'll explore that further in the episodes to come. but it brings this great vitality. And it's a little bit like imagine that you are carrying a bag of rocks, 50 kilos, right? Let's say, and you're taking it back home, and you live 10 miles up a mountain. So the sun is beating down. You feel beads of sweat um, rolling down your face, and you're carrying the bag. And for the first mile or two, it's painful, but you're managing it. Then after about 3 miles, you think, wow, I don't know if I'm going to make it. By the time you reach 4 miles, you throw the bag off your shoulders and you give up. Sometimes the work that we do can feel very much like that. So we dedicate ourselves to a particular, try to put everything into a particular job, and we give it our very best. And it's just painful because it's not aligned with who we are. And the experience of doing work that is aligned with our nature is very different. Imagine now that you're at the bottom of the same mountain, but instead of a 50 bag kilo of rocks, you're carrying 50 kilos, but it's filled with gemstones. So, diamonds, rubies, amethysts, emeralds. It's the same day, so same temperature, same distance, 10 miles up the mountain. But with a bag like that, we would probably be dancing up the mountain. So that's what it feels like when we do something that aligns with who we are. And this is such an important topic. It's actually difficult to do it justice in such a short amount of time that we have. And we'll look at this again in some of the episodes that are coming up. But, certainly I've seen in England and in other countries, most people don't like the work that they do. And their favorite day is Friday evening. And the worst day of the week for them is Monday morning. We actually spend, if you think about it, you take away the hours that we spend sleeping, we spend, and you calculate how many hours we spend doing some kind of work. And it turns out it's most of our life. So there's something deeply wrong there's something deeply wrong with the workplace and with contemporary society. If the majority of the time that we are living, we're deeply dissatisfied and we're thinking just how to reach Friday night and be able to, quit quit the work that we're doing, which doesn't satisfy us and isn't aligned with who we are. Life is short. And the Gita teaches us how to make the very work that we do something that's deeply fulfilling for us, something that nourishes us, brings vitality to us. And even more than that, Krishna will explain in the 3 steps of karma yoga how to make our work a form of worship. Imagine living our personal dharma, our personal calling, and making that an act of worship. So here in this passage where Arjuna is wondering what to do, which direction to go in, that serves as like a beginning to, like it foreshadows the teachings of karma yoga, the yoga of work, that we'll be looking at a little bit later in this same chapter. Now, before finishing, I just want to cover one very important question. So we may not all be able to have, to change our work so easily. There are bills to be paid. We may not have that freedom to just kind of change from one career to another. And so how does that work? How do those limitations that we may experience fit with the teachings on being true to our nature, being true to who we are? So one thing I have found is that sometimes it doesn't require big changes. We can make small space in our life for being true to our nature. And that small change, that small alignment with truth will have like um, a gradual, often a gradual and quite surprising result in our life. Soon we'll find that that space that we've given to being true to ourselves begins to expand naturally in our life. So I'm not suggesting, throwing away one's work opportunities, but making a space in our life for being true to our own nature. There's also another possibility. Sometimes it doesn't require a change in the kind of work that we're doing, but just in a change in our approach or a change in our role. And we can find that that can support us and bring us vitality. So there are different ways in which, even within the particular position that we're in now and whatever limitations we might be experiencing now, we can find a way of not ignoring our nature. And if we do ignore who we are, if we do ignore our nature, we will find that we'll never find fulfillment in the work that we're doing. And I've seen this. I've seen it. I've met successful lawyers who have gone from one position to another, finally made it to partnership in a large international law firm, but who have ignored their own nature and been acting against themselves. And they managed successfully to ignore that by always looking for the next promotion, thinking that that would make them happy, and that's what's missing in their life. And then once they reach the top of the corporate ladder and there's nowhere else to go, then they're faced with the awareness. There's nowhere to hide anymore. They're faced with the awareness that they've been ignoring themselves for decades. That actually can often trigger a crisis, a dark night of the soul. So I've seen that where one particular partner at a law firm experienced that kind of personal crisis and had to make some adjustments in their life and in their work. Interestingly, and this speaks to what I mentioned previously, instead of leaving law, that particular lawyer became a teacher of law, and that was a small change, but still within his field of study. But it made all the difference. And being a teacher was something that was very aligned with that person's nature. So sometimes small changes allow us to become more aligned with who we are as a person and to make a contribution in the world that's true to our purpose. So we'll stop here. We'll be returning to this topic of karma yoga, the yoga of action. There are two other steps in karma yoga, and I very much look forward to exploring that further with you in episodes to come. Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Simon. I think there, couldn't be a more relevant topic to the world that we're living in, right? We're either fighting the current to try to live authentically, or we're trying very hard to live, inauthentically, right? To live someone else's life. I mean, what would you say is maybe like one small thing we can do this week to try to start tuning into, that inner voice to our nature and just live a little bit more authentically?
Right. Great question. I want to suggest, and you'll see how this connects when practicing this little. It's a meditation one can do in the mornings. It works best in the morning, and it is a gratitude meditation, because what that does is it allows us to connect with aspects of ourselves that we are tending to overlook. So, as I mentioned, we have our various gifts that we've been given, like gemstones, intelligence, health, beauty, creativity, whatever they are, the particular gemstones that we have. One of them, of course, is our unique nature that we're born with. So I would recommend for those who wish to do this, just a short 5-minute meditation. And so find a comfortable place to sit where you won't be disturbed. And then ask yourself, what are you grateful for in your life? And think about different domains: health, relationships, finances, talents and gifts, your spiritual practice. And if it helps, write down what comes to mind and choose up to 5 things in any meditation session. And let one of those be little things that we usually take for granted. I don't know, the taste of water, the wind in your face, the smell of the sacred tulsi leaves, the smile of someone you truly care for. And as you meditate on what you're grateful for, allow the strong feeling of gratitude to fill your soul. Let it pervade every part of you. I've personally found that a meditation like that has a huge impact in um, connecting us to the gifts that we have and becoming more attuned to what brings vitality in our life. For those those who are practitioners in the bhakti tradition, there's one teacher from the 17th, 18th century, Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He says gratitude is the elixir of bhakti. So that is an easy way as a starting point to become more aligned with the gifts that we have that we easily tend to take for granted, and to begin connecting with what are those things that really bring out vitality and make us feel more alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Very powerful. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think you've definitely given us a lot to think about throughout the week. So thanks for joining us. And we look forward to having you again soon.
Thank you so much, Sienna. And thank you to everyone who's watching.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. Feel free to join us Mondays at 7:30 p.m. and Thursdays at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. If something you learned today resonated with you, if you think it might be helpful to you or to someone that you know, please feel free to like this video, subscribe, share it with others. And we look forward to continuing to see you as we navigate life through the lens of the Bhagavad Gita. See you soon.